There is a vision in the Bible so overwhelming that for centuries the rabbis would not let you read it. Not until you were 30 years old, not until you were married, not until they believed your mind was strong enough to hold it without breaking apart. They called it the Merkaba, the Chariot, and they said that men who gazed too deeply into it lost their minds. One went mad, one died, one walked away from God forever and never came back. Only one came back whole. But it survived. It was written down, copied by hand in the dark, hidden, guarded, carried through exile, through fire, through the rise and fall of empires that tried to erase the people who kept it. And tonight, after all of that, you will hear it, not as a warning, but as a comfort. Because the man who first saw it did not see it in a palace or a temple or any place of power. He saw it by a muddy river, in a foreign land, among a people who had lost absolutely everything they thought defined them. Maybe you know a little of what that feels like. Maybe you have been carrying something heavy for a long time now, a sense that God is far away, that your prayers land somewhere in silence and nothing answers back, that wherever you are right now is not where you are supposed to be. Maybe the place you call home doesn't feel like home anymore. Maybe you have been quietly homesick for a version of your life, or your faith, or yourself, that you can't quite find your way back to. This is a story for exiles. This is a story for anyone lying awake tonight in a place that doesn't feel like where they belong. So close your eyes now. Let your breathing slow. Let the noise of today fade all the way into the quiet. You are safe here. Let this ancient story carry you. Let us begin. Chapter 1. Who was Ezekiel? Who was this man sitting on a riverbank so far from home on an ordinary afternoon when the sky itself broke open? His name was Ezekiel, son of Buzi, a priest of the line of Zadok, a lineage that mattered enormously in his world because priests belonged to one place and one place only, the temple in Jerusalem. There and nowhere else, a man of his bloodline was meant to tend the altar, keep the holy fire burning through the night, and stand in the one location on earth where heaven and earth were said to touch. That was the entire shape of the life he was born for. He had likely trained for it since boyhood, learning the sacrifices, the feasts, the exact choreography of holiness that a priest was required to carry out without error. That was the life that was taken from him before it ever truly began. In the year 597 before Christ, the armies of Babylon came against Jerusalem. King Nebuchadnezzar did not burn the city that year. Not yet. That terrible ending was still 11 years away. But he emptied it of its future in a single stroke. He took the young king Jehoiakim barely on the throne. He took the craftsmen, the smiths, the soldiers, the nobles who might one day rally a rebellion, and he took the priests, men trained for a temple they would now, most of them, never serve in. Among that number, walking 1,000 miles east into the flat foreign land of Babylonia, was a young priest named Ezekiel, likely no older than 25. Picture it with me gently for a moment, not to frighten you, only to let you feel the weight he carried, the long dust of that road, stretching for weeks, the strange guttural sound of a language he had never needed to learn before, the unfamiliar shape of the ziggurats rising on the horizon where the Temple Mount should have stood against the sky. Everything Ezekiel had built his entire identity around, the priesthood, the altar, the holy city, was simply gone, taken from him in a matter of months. He was still a priest in his heart, in his training, in the blood in his veins. He simply had nowhere left on earth to be one. They were settled, resettled really, the way conquered peoples so often are, among other Judean exiles at a place called Tel Abib, beside an irrigation canal the Babylonians called the Chebar, which we know today as the Chebar. Scholars believe this was not a wild, rushing river, but a great engineered waterway, one of the broad, slow-moving arteries the Babylonians had dug to feed their vast fields of grain. A place of quiet water, a flat horizon in every direction, A foreign sky pressing down over people who had once measured their days by festivals in a city now hundreds of miles behind them. 5 years passed this way, 5 years of exile, of grief carried quietly because there was nowhere to put it down, of watching an entire generation try to remember who they were in a land that seemed determined, gently and relentlessly to make them forget. Ezekiel sat among them through all of it. Not yet a leader, not yet a prophet, simply a priest without an altar, a man whose whole purpose had been interrupted before it could properly begin. Then, in what the text calls the 30th year, very likely, scholars suggest, the exact year Ezekiel should have begun his priestly service at the altar in Jerusalem, the year his whole life had been quietly aimed toward since childhood. The heavens opened instead over a muddy irrigation canal in the middle of Babylon. Notice this, because it matters more than almost anything else in the story. God did not wait for Ezekiel to return home before speaking to him. God did not wait for the temple to be rebuilt, or for circumstances to be right, or for Ezekiel to finally feel ready. God came to the exile, in the exile exactly where he already was. On an afternoon like any other, he was writing this for tonight too, for the version of you sitting somewhere or lying somewhere that doesn't feel like where you belong. Think for a moment about what those 5 quiet years must have actually looked like day by day. The exiles at Tel Aviv were not thrown into dungeons or chained in misery the way we might picture captivity. Babylon, in its own strange way, allowed them a kind of ordinary life. Homes, small plots of land, marriages, children born who would never see Jerusalem with their own eyes. And that, in its own quiet way, may have been harder to bear than chains would have been. Chains at least confirm that something is wrong. An ordinary life lived out in the wrong country, year after year, can make grief feel almost embarrassing, almost as if you should simply be over it by now, should simply be grateful for the small mercies of a stable roof and enough bread to eat. Perhaps Ezekiel felt that quiet, confusing kind of grief too, the kind that has no dramatic edges to it at all, just a low hum of homesickness underneath every ordinary day. If that description feels familiar to you tonight, a grief without dramatic edges, a low hum of something missing beneath an otherwise ordinary life, you are not imagining it, and you are not being ungrateful by feeling it. Ezekiel sat with that same quiet ache for 5 full years before anything at all changed. The sky over that flat foreign plain was about to answer a question Ezekiel had likely never dared to ask out loud. The storm from the north, it began, the ancient text says, with a wind, not a gentle breeze drifting across the water. A great storm wind rolling in out of the north, and notice that direction for a moment, because the north was the very direction Babylon's armies had once marched from. The direction of every threat Ezekiel had ever known in his life. The direction danger always seemed to come from. Picture the sky over that flat Babylonian plain with me, slowly. The light changes first, that strange greenish stillness that settles over the land just before a great storm arrives, the kind of light that makes birds fall silent in the reeds and animals go still and watchful. Then the wind hits, sudden and full, bending the tall grasses along the canal flat against the ground, and with that wind comes something no ordinary storm had ever carried before. A vast cloud, the text says, rolling in low and heavy, with fire flashing back and forth inside it without pause, and brightness surrounding the whole of it like a halo around the sun. At its center, glowing like amber, like metal pulled white-hot from a furnace and not yet cooled. This was not lightning that strikes once and vanishes into the dark again. This was something sustained, something that did not flicker and fade, but stayed and grew and drew nearer with every passing moment. In 1849, an archaeologist named Austin Henry Layard uncovered enormous stone reliefs in the ruins of ancient Assyria, not far from Babylon, depicting winged composite creatures with human faces guarding the gates of royal palaces. figures the Assyrians called Lamassu, part man, part lion, part bull, part eagle, standing watch at every entrance to the throne room of a king. Scholars have long noted how strikingly similar these images are to the four faces Ezekiel would go on to describe. It is a small human detail worth pausing on. God did not necessarily hand Ezekiel entirely unfamiliar shapes plucked from nowhere. He may have used forms already carved into the very gates and palaces surrounding him in exile, the guardian images of the empire that had conquered him, and transformed them gently into guardians of an even greater throne. Even the language of Ezekiel's captivity was being reclaimed for something holy. Ezekiel does not run from it. Whatever fear rose in him in that instant, he cannot look away, and the words he chooses afterward tell us so much about what it felt like to stand there. Notice, as we go, how often he reaches for comparison instead of certainty, the likeness of, the appearance of, as it were, again and again. This is the language of a man trying and failing and trying again to describe something that sits entirely beyond the edge of human vocabulary. He's not being vague. He's doing the very best any human being could do, standing in front of something too vast for ordinary words to hold. And out of the churning fire at the center of that cloud, four living shapes slowly began to take form. Let that image settle over you for a moment. The storm rolling closer, the fire folding in on itself again and again, and out of that fire, four shapes emerging, the way figures might step out of a furnace and somehow not be consumed by it. Whatever this was, it was alive. And it was not simply appearing at a distance, it was moving toward him, closer with every heartbeat. This is the beginning of the vision ancient readers feared and treasured most of all, the opening scene of the Chariot, the Merkabah. And notice something tender hidden inside all this overwhelming imagery. Where does this happen? Not in a palace, with the nation gathered at a careful distance, trembling the way they once trembled at the base of Mount Sinai. Here God comes to one grieving priest, entirely alone, sitting by an irrigation canal in a foreign land, and lets him see something almost no one else in all of Scripture was ever shown. Consider, too, what it must have taken for a trained priest, a man raised on the careful theology of his people, to simply keep watching instead of hiding his face in terror. Everything he had ever been taught said that no one could see the fullness of God's glory and live. Moses himself had only been allowed to see God's back, shielded in the cleft of a rock, and even that had left him changed forever. His own face left shining afterward so brightly the people asked him to wear a veil, and yet here was Ezekiel, an ordinary priest with no such preparation, watching this storm roll closer and closer across the flat plain with nothing at all to shield him. Perhaps you have stood in your own life in front of something too large to fully process, a diagnosis, a loss, a piece of news that rearranged everything in an instant, and simply kept standing there because there was nowhere else to go, no way to look away from it. That is very close to where Ezekiel stood that afternoon, not brave in the way we usually mean the word, simply unable to run, and so quietly choosing to stay and see. The wheel of the storm was turning, and it was turning unmistakably toward the exile. Chapter 3. Wheels within wheels, eyes all around. What were these four living creatures Ezekiel now found himself staring at? And why does the description only grow stranger and somehow more wondrous the longer he looks? Each had the form of a man, the ancient text tells us, but each also carried four faces and four wings, folded and moving in ways human bodies never could. Scholars across many centuries have tried to picture this fully, to sketch it, to systematize it, and perhaps, in the end, that has always been the point. This was never meant to be drawn cleanly on a page. It was meant to overwhelm the senses, to push past the tidy categories the human mind likes to sort things into. Each creature had four faces, The face of a man looking forward, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle looking behind. Ancient tradition connects these four faces to the whole of creation gathered into a single living form. Humanity at the front, the wild beasts of the field on the right, the domesticated beasts that serve mankind on the left, and the birds of the sky watching from behind. All of creation, present at once, all of it turned instantly to face whichever direction the throne chose to move. Their wings touched one another gently as they moved together. Two wings spread wide to touch a neighbor's wings on either side. Two wings folded to cover their own bodies modestly. Under their wings, strange and unexpected, human hands, capable, purposeful, straight legs, but feet shaped like the sole of a calf's foot, gleaming like polished, burnished bronze, catching firelight. They moved like flashes of lightning across the sky, and yet, and this is the detail scholars return to again and again as the most quietly comforting part of the entire vision, they never once turned as they went. Wherever the Spirit wanted to go, they simply went straight ahead, without any need to turn back. There is something in that image worth holding on to gently tonight. A being with four faces, always looking in every direction at once, never once needing to turn back in fear or hesitation or doubt about the way behind it. Whatever this vision was showing Ezekiel, it was showing him a kind of movement that never has to look back in dread. A movement led entirely, calmly, by wherever the Spirit chooses to go next. And then, beside each living creature, resting on the ground beneath them, wheels. Wheels that gleamed like a precious stone, the color of the sea at midday. And, this is the detail that unsettled ancient readers most deeply, a wheel within a wheel, turning without turning aside, somehow able to move in any direction the creatures moved without ever needing to pivot or reorient. Because, the text explains simply, the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels themselves. Ancient rabbis gave these wheels a name of their own, the Ophanim. The wheels of the throne, spoken of in later Jewish tradition almost as living beings in their own right. And the rims of these wheels, Ezekiel tells us, were full of eyes all the way around, eyes everywhere, watching in every direction at once, nothing outside its sight, nothing hidden behind its back, ever at any angle. If you have ever felt like something in your life was happening in a place no one could see, some private grief you have never spoken aloud, some hidden burden you carry quietly through your days, some wound you assume no one has ever truly noticed, hold this image gently for a moment. Wheels within wheels, eyes all around, missing absolutely nothing. This vision does not describe a distant God who glances away when things get difficult to look at. Above the heads of the living creatures, something like a great expanse began to spread outward. Clear as crystal, the text says, terrible and beautiful to look upon all at once. And above that vast, glassy expanse, a sound was beginning to rise. Ancient Jewish tradition would later give these four living creatures their own name entirely, the Chariot, simply meaning the living ones, as though no more specific title could ever do justice to whatever they truly were. Later prophets and mystics, reading Ezekiel's account centuries afterward, connected these same four faces to the very layout of the ancient Israelite camp in the wilderness, where the 12 tribes were arranged around the tabernacle under four great banners, a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle among them, as though the whole of Israel's ancient camp and the whole of creation itself was somehow present and represented in this one moving vision beside the water. Scholars have long noted a curious detail as well. Nowhere in the account does Ezekiel describe the creatures as frightening in the way we might expect. Overwhelming, yes. Alien in their strangeness, certainly. But there is no terror in his description of them, no sense of menace directed at him personally. They are simply vast and strange and entirely occupied with their singular purpose, carrying the throne wherever the Spirit willed it to go. Rest here for a moment and let your breathing stay slow. Whatever fear rose up in Ezekiel that day, it does not seem to have come from the creatures themselves being cruel or threatening. It came, more likely, from simply standing too close to something too much larger than himself. That is a very different kind of fear than the fear of being harmed. It is closer to the fear of finally understanding for the first time how small you actually are, and discovering, to your quiet surprise, that being small in front of something this vast does not mean being unseen or unwanted or unloved by it. The wheels were turning. The throne, whatever it was coming closer still. Chapter 4. The sound of many waters. What does it sound like, do you imagine, when the sky itself begins to speak? As the wings of the living creatures moved together, Ezekiel says, "The sound was like the roar of many waters rushing all at once, like the very voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of a great army marching in the distance." And then, in a single instant, complete silence, as the wings dropped perfectly still. Picture this contrast with me slowly. First, overwhelming sound, thunderous and vast. The roar of a flooding river meeting the crash of an approaching army, all layered together. And then, without warning, absolute stillness. The wings fold gently downward. The wheels pause where they stand. And into that sudden, enormous stillness, a voice begins to speak from somewhere above the crystal expanse over their heads. This is the very peak of the first half of the vision, and it deserves to be told slowly, without rushing past it. Above the crystal expanse, there was the likeness of a throne, like a sapphire stone in its appearance, cool and deep blue like the clearest sky. And seated on that throne, high above everything Ezekiel had seen so far, a likeness with the appearance of a man. After chapters of wheels and wings and fire and eyes without number, after all of that overwhelming, alien, almost incomprehensible imagery pressing in from every side, the vision does not end on a monster or a machine or something wholly other and unreachable. It ends gently on the appearance of a man. Not because God possesses a body the way we do, but because, scholars suggest, this is Scripture's tenderest way of telling us something we desperately need to hear. Whatever fills the wheels and the fire and the storm and the eyes, it is not cold. It is not distant. There is something here that can, somehow, be met. From what appeared to be his waist upward, Ezekiel saw a gleam like amber, like fire held and enclosed all around without escaping. From the waist downward, more fire and brilliant light surrounding the whole figure, like a rainbow appearing in storm clouds on a rainy day. That, Ezekiel says simply, is what the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like. A rainbow, the very sign God once gave to Noah, the sign of a promise never again to destroy the world in flood, wrapped gently around the base of this vast, terrifying, glorious throne. Let that settle into the quiet with you. Even at the very center of the most overwhelming vision in all of Scripture, the sign of an ancient promise is still there, quietly present, wrapped into the very light surrounding the throne. Judgment and mercy, held together, inseparable in the light itself. Notice, too, the careful, almost hesitant way the ancient text builds toward this single image, piece by piece, layer by layer, the storm, then the creatures, then the wheels, then the expanse, then the throne, then finally, at the very peak of it all, the likeness of a man seated above everything else. Scholars have long pointed out that this slow, careful building is itself a kind of reverence, a way of approaching the holiest possible image as gently as language will allow, never rushing toward it, never treating it carelessly. Even the way this story is told teaches us something about how to approach the deepest mysteries of our own lives. Slowly, layer by layer, without demanding to understand everything all at once. And in the middle of the rainbow light surrounding that throne, Ancient readers have long noticed one more detail worth holding quietly tonight: fire and light and color all around the throne, and yet nothing in the description says that Ezekiel was harmed by any of it, or burned or destroyed by standing so close to something so overwhelming. He was overwhelmed, yes. He was undone, certainly, but he was not consumed. The fire that surrounded the throne of God, unlike every ordinary fire Ezekiel had ever known, did not need to destroy what it touched. Whatever fire is present in your own life right now, whatever difficulty, whatever grief, whatever overwhelming thing feels too large to stand in front of, it does not have to be the kind of fire that destroys. Some fire simply reveals. Some fire simply warms. Some fire, held close enough to the throne, becomes wrapped gently in the light of an old and steady promise. And when Ezekiel finally saw the whole of it, all at once, he tells us simply, "I fell on my face." Chapter 5. The scroll that tasted like honey. What happens to a man when he is lying face down in the mud of a riverbank, and he finally hears the voice from the throne speak directly to him? Ezekiel is down on the ground now, the storm still churning somewhere above him, the wheels still resting where they stopped, the throne still blazing quietly overhead. And then he hears the voice say, "Son of man, stand up on your feet, and I will speak with you." As the voice spoke, a spirit entered into him and set him gently on his feet, and Ezekiel heard the one speaking to him continue. This is the moment scholars often call the commissioning, the exact point where overwhelming spectacle turns, quietly, into a personal calling. Notice the name God chooses for him here and repeats again and again throughout this entire book: Son of Man, not priest, not prophet, not even his own given name, simply a human being, small, mortal, made of dust and breath, standing in front of something impossibly vast. If you have ever felt small in front of your own circumstances, small compared to your grief, small compared to the scale of what feels broken in the world or in your own private life, notice this gently: that very smallness is exactly where God chooses to speak. Not to the version of you that has everything together, to the version lying face down in the mud. The voice tells Ezekiel he is being sent, not to friendly strangers eager to hear something new, but to the house of Israel, a rebellious nation that has rebelled against God generation after generation, stubborn and hard of heart, just as their ancestors were before them. And the voice tells him something almost startling in its honesty: whether they listen or whether they refuse to listen, for they are, after all, a rebellious people, they will at least know that a true prophet has been among them. Notice carefully what is not promised in that sentence. Success is not promised. Being believed or thanked or vindicated is not promised. Only this, that the truth will have been spoken faithfully, and that this on its own matters, regardless of whether anyone chooses to receive it. Then something happens that has puzzled and quietly comforted readers for thousands of years since. A hand stretches out toward him holding a scroll, written on both the front and the back, with words of lament and mourning and woe. And the voice says gently, "Son of man, eat what is offered to you. Eat this scroll, and then go, speak to the house of Israel." Ezekiel opens his mouth. The voice tells him to fill his stomach entirely with this scroll, to let it become part of him rather than something merely read and set aside. And Ezekiel eats it, there on the riverbank, in front of the wheels and the fire and the throne. And here is the detail that stops nearly every reader in their tracks, every single time they read it slowly enough to notice it. "It was in my mouth," Ezekiel says, "like honey for sweetness." A scroll filled entirely with lament and mourning and woe, heavy words, hard words, words describing a people's failure and the judgment still coming toward them. And somehow it tasted sweet in his mouth. Scholars suggest this is one of the quietest, most profound truths tucked inside this entire vision. Even the hardest words God ever asks us to carry are, in the very moment we truly receive them from His own hand rather than from fear, sweet. Because they arrive wrapped in nearness, in calling, in the plain fact that we are never carrying them entirely alone. Consider for a moment the specific words written on that scroll: lament and mourning and woe. 3 words, and scholars have often noticed they seem to march in a kind of quiet crescendo. Lament, a private grief spoken softly. Mourning, a public and shared sorrow, the kind an entire community carries together. And woe, a warning, a word almost always attached in Scripture to coming judgment. Ezekiel was being asked to swallow all 3 at once: private grief, shared sorrow, and warning of what still lay ahead for his people. That is an enormous weight to carry inside one body. And yet somehow, in the moment of receiving it, rather than merely dreading it from a distance, it turns sweet. Perhaps you are carrying your own version of that scroll tonight. Private grief only you fully know the shape of, a shared sorrow with people you love, and some quiet worry about what still lies ahead. You do not have to swallow it all at once by force, the way you might if you were trying to master it alone. You are only asked to receive it gently from a hand that is not indifferent to what it costs you. The scroll was inside him now, part of him now, no longer something external to hold at arm's length. The word had become woven into his own body, and the throne, high above, was not yet finished showing him what all of this truly meant. Chapter 6. Where the glory went. Why, of all the people in that generation, did God choose to show a priest without a temple, the very throne room of heaven itself? And what did it ultimately mean for the temple Ezekiel had already lost? This is the deepest turn in the whole vision, and scholars across many centuries have circled around it patiently, again and again, because it answers a question every exile, every displaced person, every quiet wanderer eventually finds themselves asking somewhere in the dark: if the holy place is gone, is God gone with it? Every priest of Ezekiel's careful training believed without question that they already knew the answer. God's glory lived in the temple in Jerusalem, specifically in the Holy of Holies, above the Ark of the Covenant, between the outstretched wings of the golden cherubim. That was the fixed address of the divine presence on earth. That was the one unmovable point where heaven was understood to touch down. And now here was Ezekiel, a priest of that very temple, 5 long years into exile, a full 1,000 miles from that exact sacred building, watching the glory of the Lord appear not above the ark in distant Jerusalem, but above a moving chariot throne, riding on wheels, moving under its own power, carried by 4 living creatures covered in eyes, appearing beside an irrigation canal in the flat, ordinary middle of Babylon. The wheels were the answer to a fear Ezekiel had likely never spoken aloud, not even to himself. If the presence of God could ride on wheels, if it did not need to remain fixed forever inside one building, one city, one set of familiar borders, then it could follow the exiles all the way into Babylon. It could sit patiently beside a muddy canal, alongside the defeated and the displaced and the homesick. It could go, quite literally, wherever the people needed it to go next. Later, in this same book, Ezekiel would be shown something almost unbearable to read closely. The glory of the Lord, slowly rising up from within the temple itself, moving first to the threshold, then to the east gate, then finally out over the mountain to the east of the city, leaving Jerusalem entirely before its final, devastating destruction. Refusing to remain trapped inside a building that was about to fall into ruin, the presence did not perish along with the stones of the temple. It moved. It went ahead of the people who had nowhere left to stand. There is a smaller, quieter detail tucked into this same chapter of Ezekiel that scholars often point to as well. The text specifies that this vision came in the 5th year of the exile, on the 5th day of the 4th month, a level of careful, precise dating rare almost anywhere else in prophetic literature. Scholars suggest this precision was deliberate. Ezekiel was not simply recording a private mystical feeling to be doubted or dismissed later. He was marking, with the same careful record-keeping a priest would have used for sacred calendars and feast days back in Jerusalem, that something real had happened on a real day that could be remembered and returned to. Even in exile, even without an altar, he kept the instincts of a priest, precise, careful, determined to preserve what mattered. This is, in many ways, the central mapping point of the entire book of Ezekiel. Exile is not the same thing as abandonment. The loss of the sanctuary is not the loss of the sacred itself. God rides on wheels precisely so that no collapse of stone, no fall of any city, no scattering of any people across any foreign land can ever leave him unable to reach the ones he loves. If some part of your own life has quietly fallen apart, a home that no longer feels safe, a marriage that has grown distant, a church or a community you had to leave, a version of yourself you cannot quite find your way back to, hold this gently tonight. The throne does not need the building to still be standing. It was built with wheels precisely because it was always headed toward wherever you would eventually end up. Scholars often point out something remarkable in the geography of this book as well. Ezekiel receives the vision of the departing glory beside the river Chebar, far from Jerusalem, and later, in the very last chapters of the book, he is shown a vision of a restored temple, with the glory of the Lord returning, entering this time through the very same east gate it had once departed from. The whole shape of the book, scholars note, is a single long arc, departure, exile, and eventual return, traced by the movement of glory itself rather than by armies or kings. The wheels that carried God's presence out of a falling city are the same wheels, ultimately, that would one day carry it home again. If any part of your own life has felt like that same arc, a departure you never wanted, a season of exile you did not choose, and a quiet hope for some kind of return you cannot yet picture clearly, hold on to this shape tonight. The story of the wheels was never only about leaving. It was always, from the very beginning, also about coming back. The vision was almost finished now, but its deepest secret, the very reason it had been hidden away so carefully for so long, was still waiting to be told. Chapter 7. Why the rabbis forbade this chapter. So why, after all of this, after the wheels and the fire and a throne wrapped gently in rainbow light, did the keepers of this sacred text eventually decide it was simply too dangerous for ordinary readers to read? Centuries after Ezekiel walked the earth, the sages who compiled the Mishnah, the earliest core of Jewish oral law, wrote down a rule that has echoed quietly for nearly 2,000 years since. The account of the chariot, the Merkabah, should not be expounded before even a single other person, unless that person was already wise and could understand it entirely on his own. And it should not be taught, tradition widely holds, to anyone below a certain age of maturity, a boundary many later teachers placed at 30 years old, the very age scholars believe Ezekiel himself may have been when the vision first came to him. Why such caution around a vision meant at its heart to comfort? Because of a story the rabbis told for generations afterward to explain exactly what could go wrong. A story about 4 sages who once entered what they called the Pardes, the orchard, a name given to the deepest, most demanding mystical contemplation of these very visions. 4 men went in together. The Talmud names all 4 of them plainly: Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Elisha ben Abuya, remembered afterwards simply as Acher, meaning the other, because of what happened to him inside. And finally, Rabbi Akiva, one of the most revered teachers in all of Jewish tradition. Ben Azai gazed too deeply, tradition says, and died. Ben-Zoma gazed and lost his reason entirely, his mind never fully returning to him afterward. Elisha ben Abuya gazed and, the tradition holds, turned away from his faith completely, becoming a heretic for the remainder of his life. Only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace, and this is the phrase repeated so carefully across the centuries, came out again in peace. This is not a story meant to frighten you away from God tonight, or to make you afraid of what you have just heard. It is a story about what can happen when a mind tries to seize the infinite by force, alone, without humility, treating mystery as something to conquer rather than something to receive. Tradition holds that Akiva alone survived the encounter whole, not because he was cleverer than the other three, but because, the sages taught carefully, he had entered already rooted in reverence and in love, rather than in pride or mere curiosity alone. This, in the end, is why the chariot was hidden away for 15 long centuries, not to keep God locked away from ordinary people, but to protect ordinary people from approaching the deepest mysteries of the divine with pride instead of humility, with force instead of trust, with grasping hands instead of open ones. And here, gently, is where the mystery from the very beginning of tonight's story finally closes. The vision was never hidden because it was false or dangerous in the way fire is dangerous to the careless. It was hidden because it was simply too heavy to be handled carelessly, the way you would never hand a small child a live coal, not because the coal isn't real fire, but because of exactly what carelessness with real fire can do to someone unprepared for its weight. Tonight, you are not entering the Forbades to prove anything to anyone, or to master some spiritual height, or to conquer a mystery the way those 4 sages once tried to. You are simply listening, the way Ezekiel himself first received all of this, lying face down in the mud, small, honest, entirely open. That, the old tradition insists again and again, is the very posture that protects a person, not force, not pride, simply an open, honest heart, ready quietly to receive rather than to seize. It is worth saying, too, that this caution was never unique to Ezekiel's vision alone. Jewish tradition placed similar careful boundaries around the opening chapters of Genesis, the account of creation itself, for many of the same reasons. Some truths are so foundational, so capable of reshaping a person's entire understanding of reality, that they were considered too important to hand over carelessly, without the guidance of someone wise enough to walk alongside the one receiving them. This was never, the honest reading of history shows us, an attempt to withhold truth out of control or fear of losing power. It came from a much gentler impulse, the same impulse that makes a careful parent wait until a child is old enough to understand grief or loss or the weight of certain kinds of love before explaining it to them in full. These are real and ongoing conversations among people of genuine faith across many centuries. How much of the deepest mystery to hand over, and when, and to whom? You do not need to resolve that debate tonight. You only need to notice that the caution itself came from love, not from a desire to shut you out forever. The wheels are still turning gently somewhere in the dark, but now at last, the whole of this vision turns fully toward you. Chapter 8. Why this was written for you tonight. What does any of this ancient storms and wheels and thrones and scrolls that somehow taste like honey and centuries-old warnings whispered by careful rabbis have to do with you, lying here right now in the quiet dark? Here, gathered gently into one place, is the lesson underneath the entire vision. Ezekiel was not shown the throne inside the temple, at the height of his people's power and comfort and certainty. He was shown the throne beside an ordinary canal, in exile, in defeat, in the plainest and least glorious circumstances of his entire life. And it was there, exactly there, and nowhere else, that heaven finally opened above him. That is the very first thing this means for you tonight. Wherever you happen to be right now, Whatever place in your life quietly feels like exile to you, like the wrong address, like somewhere you never meant or wanted to end up, that place is not too far from God to be found in. The wheels have eyes all around them, watching in every direction at once. Nothing about where you are tonight, however hidden it feels, is hidden from the one who first sent them. The second thing this means for you, the hardest words, the heaviest griefs, the things weighing quietly on your chest right now that feel like a scroll full of lament and mourning and woe. Even those, held rightly, held close to the source they came from, rather than gripped tightly alone in fear, can somehow become sweet in your mouth, the way they did in his. Not because the pain isn't real, or because it should be minimized or explained away too quickly, but because you are not holding it alone in the dark tonight. Something moves toward you the very way the throne once moved toward Ezekiel, deliberately, unhurried, patient, but absolutely certain to arrive. You are seen tonight. You are known completely. The eyes on those ancient wheels have never once, not for a single moment, looked away from you. You are held. You are loved. You are safe. Let your shoulders drop all the way down now. Let your hands rest open in the dark instead of clenched tightly around whatever you've been carrying. You do not need to solve anything at all tonight. You do not need to understand every wheel or every wing or every strange and ancient detail we have walked through together this evening. You only need to lie still now, the way Ezekiel once lay still in the mud beside that quiet water, and let the voice that gently raised him back to his feet be near you now too, in this exact moment. You are not forgotten tonight, and you never have been. Whatever storm carried you to wherever you are right now, it was never sent to destroy you. It was sent because something was riding quietly inside it that wanted all along simply to reach you. Consider for a moment everything this single vision quietly refuses to say. It never says that Ezekiel's exile was a mistake, something to be undone before God could act. It never says that the years of grief beside that canal were wasted years, simply waiting to be over so real life could begin again. Instead, it says something far more startling. Those very years, that very place, that very ordinary afternoon beside slow-moving water, were exactly where the deepest revelation in the entire book was given, not despite the exile, within it. Whatever season you are in right now, however far it feels from where you hope to be by now, however long it has already lasted, it is not a delay standing between you and some better chapter still to come. It may quietly already be the very place where something is being shown to you that could not have been shown anywhere else. That does not make the grief smaller. It does not erase the homesickness. But it does mean you are not waiting in the wrong place for God to notice you. You are held. You are loved. You are safe. Let that be the last thought you carry down into sleep tonight. Closing and prayer. We have walked beside the canal together with him tonight. We have watched the great storm break open from the north. We have seen the wheels within wheels, the countless eyes that never once look away, the throne wrapped gently in the light of an old, old promise. We have tasted, together with him, how even deep sorrow can somehow turn sweet in an honest, open mouth. And we have understood at last why this ancient chapter was kept so carefully hidden for so long. Not to shut you out of it forever, but to be handed to you gently, in humility, exactly when you were finally ready to receive it. And the lesson underneath all of it tonight is simple enough to carry quietly down into sleep with you. No exile is ever far enough to put you outside the reach of God. No collapse, no quiet loss, no foreign land you find yourself in tonight, however unfamiliar, however far from where you meant to be, is the end of your story. The throne has wheels precisely because it was always coming toward you. Ezekiel would go on to spend more than 20 years prophesying from that same land of exile, never once returning to see Jerusalem rebuilt with his own eyes. And yet, by the very end of his long life, He had been shown visions of a restored temple, a returning glory, dry bones rising up and breathing again, a whole valley of hopeless things brought fully back to life. He never needed to leave Babylon to be shown that restoration was still coming. The hope did not wait for the circumstances to change first. The hope arrived in the middle of the exile itself, long before anything on the outside was different at all. Let us pray together now. Father, we come to you tonight the way Ezekiel once came to you, tired, far from where we ever thought we would be, carrying more than we ever meant to carry alone. Thank you for the wheels within wheels, for the countless eyes that never turn away from the people you love, for a throne that rides out to meet the exile, instead of waiting quietly in a palace for someone worthy enough to arrive first. We do not ask you tonight to explain every hard thing we are holding on to in the dark. We only ask that you would be near, the way you were near a grieving priest once beside a muddy canal far from home in Babylon. If there is a scroll of sorrow in our hands tonight, let it grow sweet the way it did in his mouth, simply because we know, finally, that we are not carrying it alone anymore. Quiet every anxious thought running through this mind tonight. Slow every racing heart. Let your presence, which needs no perfect temple, no perfect place, no perfect person to dwell among, settle gently now over the one listening to these words. Sleep now, beloved. You are held. You are loved. You are safe. You are not forgotten. And you were never once outside the reach of the one who rides on the storm simply to find you. May the Lord bless you and keep you tonight. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you gently and give you peace. This is Night Psalms, and we will walk with you again soon. Good night. Amen.